Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening a door not just into a book, but really into this huge library of literature, history, law, stuff that shapes so much of Western culture.
Yeah, we're tackling a really foundational text today. And for this deep dive, we're looking at it purely as this incredibly complex, compiled literary document.
And the specific version we're digging into is the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version.
Right. Which is fantastic for what we're doing because the editorial notes, they're sort of like getting a peek behind the curtain. They give you a roadmap for how this monumental thing was actually put together over centuries.
Monumental is definitely the word. The sheer scale.
Yeah.
The source material mentions it's well over 1 million words, thousands of pages.
Yeah.
It's not just one story, it's like an archive.
It really is an archive. And the NRSV's mission, their mandate, that's kind of our way in. They had this tricky job to keep the dignity of the King James tradition, but also bring in modern scholarship, accuracy, clarity.
And they have that guiding phrase,
Wow.
right?
Yeah, as literal as possible, as free as necessary. It perfectly captures that tension, that balancing act in translation, and that's what we're interested in exploring today.
That phrase alone tells you so much, doesn't it?
Yes.
Literal as possible, as free as necessary. It highlights that every choice is a negotiation. We're always reading a translation, shaped by scholars.
Absolutely. And those choices, those editorial decisions, that's often where the really surprising insights are hiding. Like, sometimes the text you read isn't actually based on the standard Hebrew text, the Masoretic text.
Oh, really?
Yeah, if an older version like the Greek Septuagint or the Syriac offered a reading that seemed clearer or, demonstrably more accurate, the NRSV translators went with that. So you're dealing with layers upon layers of scrutiny and refinement over millennia.
So our mission today is to use these clues, the stories themselves, the editorial choices, to pull out some of these surprising facts about how these narratives of power, consequence were built. Basically offering you a shortcut to understanding this foundational stuff.
Exactly. Let's dive right in at the beginning.
Okay, so Genesis. We're barely past the creation accounts, and boom, the narrative just plunges straight into, well, the darkest parts of human nature.
Right. Eden's beauty almost immediately gives way to fratricide. Cain killing Abel in Genesis chapter 4. It sets a really terrifying tone right away.
It really does. And that conversation afterwards, when the Lord confronts Cain, it's chilling. Where's your brother Abel?
And Cain's response, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? It's become so famous, that line.
It's more than just playing dumb, isn't it? It
Yeah.
feels like a philosophical argument almost,
Yeah.
like he's rejecting the whole idea of responsibility for others.
It's incredibly audacious, but even before the act itself, there's that fascinating moment where the Lord tries to warn Cain, tries to define sin.
Yes, Genesis 4.7. That's such a powerful image.
It really is. The Lord sees Cain's anger and says basically, if you don't do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it.
Sin isn't just, a bad choice here. It's personified. It's like this creature crouching, wanting to possess him. It makes the internal struggle feel so external, so visceral.
It's a classic literary move, externalizing that internal battle. But notice the end. You must master it. The responsibility ultimately lands right back on Cain. It establishes that human accountability from the get-go.
It's that primal struggle laid bare. But then the consequence for Cain's exile and this sevenfold vengeance protection, it seems like humanity immediately takes that idea and just twists it.
Yeah, the narrative instantly shows things spiraling. Just a few verses later, we get Lamech, one of Cain's descendants.
Right, Lamech's poem.
He uses Lamech to show how violence just escalates uncontrollably. Cain got a sevenfold protection right. Lamech boasts to his wives that he killed a man just for wounding him, and then declares, if Cain is avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold.
77-fold. It's such a specific, almost absurd number. It feels completely detached from any sense of justice or proportion.
Exactly. It signals that humans have grabbed onto this idea of retribution and just inflated it wildly, driven by pride and boastfulness. It's a literary signal of rapid moral decay.
So we go from creation to this almost immediate breakdown of social order fueled by violence.
A very quick slide into chaos. And that theme, the theme of, let's say, bad choices and consequences, especially prioritizing the immediate over the long term, continues right into the next big family drama, Jacob and Esau.
Ah, yes, the birthright and the blessing. Here, it's less about outright violence, initially anyway, and more about transactions.
Yeah, it shifts to valuation. Esau stumbles in from the field, absolutely famished. Jacob's making lentil stew.
Yeah.
And the text makes the transaction sound almost ridiculously casual.
Let me have some of that red stuff.
Hmm.
That's literally what he calls it.
Right, which is why he gets the name Edom, meaning red. He sells his sacred birthright, his future, his inheritance, his status for a bowl of stew because he's hungry right now.
The text even underlines it. Thus Esau despised his birthright. He just didn't value the future compared to his immediate physical need. That casualness is striking.
And that single impulsive act, selling something invaluable for something trivial, it fuels the next conflict, the big deception.
Right, Rebekah and Jacob stealing the blessing from Isaac, who's old and blind. Rebekah is really the engine behind that plot, isn't she?
She absolutely orchestrates the whole thing, the goat skins, the clothes. But Jacob has that moment of hesitation, which is interesting.
Yeah, but he's not worried about the morality, is he? He's worried about getting caught and receiving a curse instead of blessing. It's a pure risk assessment.
Exactly. And Rebecca just doubles down. Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my word. She takes the spiritual risk for the strategic gain. The narrative is focused on securing that promise, that power, through cunning, not necessarily through righteousness.
But the consequences linger. That's what the text shows later, right?
Yeah.
Decades pass. Jacob's returning home.
And he hears Esau is coming to meet him with 400 men. 400! Jacob is terrified. The text says he was greatly afraid and distressed.
He splits his whole caravan, his family, his flocks, into two groups, basically preparing for disaster.
It demonstrates that the consequence of that initial stew transaction, compounded by the blessing deception, is this long shadow of fear and potential violence. The narrative connects the dots. Actions, even seemingly small ones, have lasting repercussions you eventually have to face.
Okay, so we move from these intense family dramas in Genesis to the epic scale of Exodus and then into the really granular detail of Leviticus. It's quite a shift.
It's a massive shift in scope. We go from the personal to the national, the birth of a people. But first, the text needs to reestablish divine authority, which happens with the call of Moses.
At the burning bush, yeah.
Right. And notice how God introduces himself in Exodus 3. It's all about continuity. The Lord, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. It links the current moment directly back to those earlier promises.
That past covenant is the foundation for everything that's about to happen. But then, almost immediately, we hit one of the most difficult, theologically challenging ideas in the whole story.
You mean the hardening of Pharaoh's heart?
Exactly. Exodus 4.21, it says it right there. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. God says he will do it.
It's stated very explicitly. The text doesn't shy away from it. It's presented as direct divine action, causing Pharaoh's refusal. It basically sets up the conflict and necessitates the plagues.
But that's tough, isn't it, for us reading it now? If God is actively causing the resistance, how do you think about Pharaoh's culpability or the justice of the plagues falling on Egypt?
That's the theological knot the text ties. It suggests that the larger divine plan, freeing the Israelites through this massive display of power, sometimes operates outside our usual human frameworks of free will and maybe fairness. The refusal becomes instrumental to the story being told.
The spectacle of the plagues needs the hardened heart to happen.
Pretty much. And that spectacle is all about establishing this covenant community, which then requires this intense focus on separation, holiness, order, which brings us to the tabernacle.
The portable sanctuary. The instructions for building it are just incredibly detailed.
Overwhelmingly so. Exodus 26, Exodus 37, it's chapter after chapter of specifications. Every curtain hook, every frame dimension.
And the materials. It's not just any wood. It has to be acacia wood. Not just cloth, but fine twisted linen with specific colors. Blue, purple, crimson yarns. Gold overlay everywhere. It sounds incredibly opulent.
It's like reading architectural blueprints mixed with luxury design specs. But why? Why all this minute detail?
Good question. What's the thinking there?
Well, the text gives a clue. The command isn't just build a tent, it's build it according to the plan for it that you were shown on the mountain. The idea is that they're replicating a divine, heavenly pattern on earth.
So the precision isn't just for show. It's necessary to make it a true reflection of the heavenly reality, a proper place for the divine presence.
Exactly. It's about creating the right conditions, the perfect structure for God to dwell among them, especially while they're this vulnerable, mobile group in the wilderness.
Okay, that makes sense. And then that same level of precision carries right over into Leviticus, but shifts from building plans to, well, everyday life.
Right.
Rituals, purity, cleanliness.
Total focus on maintaining holiness through specific actions. And again, the control is absolute. Think about the perpetual fire on the altar shall not go out. or the grain offering specific flour, oil, frankincense, has to be eaten as unleavened cakes. Every variable is controlled.
It leaves no room for error, really. But the parts that always stand out, the ones that sound maybe strangest to modern ears, are those extensive purity laws. Leviticus 13 to 15.
Right, dealing with physical conditions and how uncleanness is transmitted.
Hmm.
And that category of leprous disease or sarath, it's fascinating because it's so broad.
It's not just skin conditions, right? It applies to clothes.
Yeah.
And even houses.
Yeah, houses. If a house develops some kind of discoloration, mold, mildew, the text treats it as a kind of uncleanness, a decay that needs ritual intervention.
And the ritual for cleansing an afflicted house in Leviticus 14 is something else. It sounds almost magical.
It's pure ritual theater. The priest needs cedar wood, crimson yarn, hyssop, and 2 clean birds. One bird gets killed over fresh running water in an earthen vessel.
Okay.
Then the priest dips the cedar, the yarn, the hyssop, and the living bird into the blood of the dead bird mixed with the fresh water, sprinkles the house 7 times.
Wow. And then what happens with the living bird?
He releases it into the open field. The idea is it carries the contamination away, symbolically cleansing the space. It's incredibly visual, sensory, the blood, the colors, the wood scent, the action of release.
It's designed to be memorable, to really drive home the separation between clean and unclean.
Absolutely. And that vigilance extends right down to the body. Leviticus 15 has all these detailed rules about bodily discharges, semen, menstrual blood, other flows.
And how uncleanness spreads through contact.
Exactly. If someone with a discharge sits on a bed or a saddle, that object becomes unclean. If you touch the bed, you become unclean until evening, and you have to wash yourself and your clothes. It creates this whole system of careful interaction.
So the takeaway is that building this covenant community wasn't just about big miracles or the 10 Commandments. It was deeply embedded in the everyday, the physical, the meticulous details of ritual and separation.
The grand theology is immediately grounded in the absolute minutiae of daily life. The sacred and the mundane are completely intertwined.
Okay, let's shift gears now into the historical books. So Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, which, as you mentioned, scholars often group together.
Right. They're often called the former prophets in Jewish tradition, or what scholars term the Deuteronomistic history, the DH.
And crucially, these aren't history books like we think of them today, aiming for objectivity. They have a very specific purpose.
Definitely not objective history. The introduction in our source material spells it out. This is didactic literature. It's structured around a core theological idea, retribution, meaning it's designed to teach a lesson. It selectively presents Israel's history to demonstrate over and over that obedience to God brings blessings, security, success, while disobedience brings punishment, disaster, exile.
So it's basically reading history backward from the catastrophe, the destruction, and exile to explain why it happened. It's a theological argument using historical events.
Precisely. It's a sermon shaped like a history. And that retribution principle starts immediately and, frankly, brutally in the book of Joshua.
With the concept of harem.
Yes, harem, often translated as the ban or devoted to destruction. It's this command to utterly destroy certain enemies and their possessions as an offering to God, a way of ensuring ritual purity for Israel.
And we see the consequences of violating this in the story of Achan right after the fall of Jericho.
Exactly. Jericho falls miraculously. Everything in it is under the harem. But Achan, in Joshua 7, secretly takes some silver, gold, and a fancy Babylonian mantle. Just one guy.
But the consequence isn't just for him.
No, that's the point. Because of his hidden sin, the entire Israelite army suffers a humiliating defeat at the small town of Ai. It demonstrates collective liability.
And when Achan's caught, the punishment is severe.
It's total. The text says they stoned him, then burned him with fire together with all that he has, which implies his family, his livestock, everything associated with him is destroyed because of his transgression. It hammers home the seriousness of covenant loyalty for the whole community.
It's incredibly stark, yet the narrative balances this severity, doesn't it, with Rahab?
Yes, Rahab, the prostitute from Jericho. She helps the Israelite spies, acts in faith towards their God, and because of that action, she and her entire family are specifically spared from the harem when Jericho is destroyed.
So the text shows that faithfulness, responding correctly to God's plan, matters more than your social standing or your background. Justice is based on adherence to the covenant.
Exactly. It sets up that dynamic. But that cycle of failure, punishment, crying out, and deliverance becomes the absolute engine of the next book, Judges.
Right, the infamous Judges cycle. It just repeats over and over.
It's the narrative backbone. The Israelites do evil in the sight of the Lord. God sells them into the hands of an oppressor. They suffer, they cry out. God raises up a judge, a deliverer. There's peace for a generation. And then
They do evil again. The cycle restarts. It feels like a downward spiral.
it's explicitly portrayed as a society decaying, losing its way due to repeated moral failure and maybe exhaustion. And the stories within that cycle can be incredibly violent, and the violence is often presented as, well, divinely sanctioned.
Like the story of Jael and Sisera. That one always stands out.
It's incredibly vivid. Judges 4 and 5. Sisera, the enemy Canaanite general, is on the run after a battle. He seeks refuge in the tent of Jael.
And she acts like a good host, gives him milk, covers him with a rug.
Lulls him into a false sense of security. Then, while he's asleep, exhausted, she takes a tent peg, a common household item for her, and a mallet, and drives it right through his temple into the ground.
It's brutal. And the song about it afterwards, the song of Deborah in Judges 5, doesn't condemn her at all.
Quite the opposite. It celebrates her. Most blessed of women be Jael. She struck Sisera, she crushed his head, she shattered and pierced his temple. The text frames this extreme violence as heroic, a righteous act of deliverance for Israel.
So this pattern of chaos and violence in Judges
Yeah.
eventually leads the people to demand something different.
Right. They've had enough of the cycle, the instability. They look around at other nations and say, we want a king like everyone else. This sets up the transition in 1 Samuel.
But the prophet Samuel is not thrilled about this idea.
Not at all. He gives this incredibly powerful, almost cynical warning about what monarchy actually means in practice. 1 Samuel 8.
He lays out the costs, doesn't he?
He details it point by point.
Yeah.
The king will take your sons for his army and his chariots. He'll take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, bakers. He'll take the best of your fields, your vineyards, your olive groves. He'll take 1/10 of your grain, your flocks. He'll take your servants.
It sounds like a blueprint for centralized state exploitation.
It absolutely is. He basically says, you'll become his slaves. And he warns them, when you eventually cry out because of the king you chose, the Lord will not answer you in that day. It's this potent anti-monarchical critique right at the founding of the monarchy.
But they don't listen. They want the king anyway.
They insist. They want the stability, the image of being like other nations, and so the path is set for King Saul, and, predictably, for Saul's failure.
His downfall comes when he disobeys a direct command regarding the harem
Right.
against the Amalekites.
Yes, in 1 Samuel 15, he's told to destroy everything, but he spares the Amalekite king, Agag, and the best of the sheep and cattle, supposedly to sacrifice them later. But Samuel sees it as disobedience driven by wanting to please the people.
And there's that incredibly symbolic moment with the robe.
It's pure political theater. Samuel turns to leave. Saul grabs the edge of his robe desperately and it tears. Samuel immediately seizes on the image. The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this very day and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. The physical tear symbolizes the political rupture. Saul's reign is effectively over.
So the Deuteronomistic historian writing Kings traces this pattern of obedience and disobedience through all the kings. But later on, another writer revisits this history.
Yes, centuries later, probably around the 4th century BCE, you have the chronicler writing the books of Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah. And the chronicler has an even stricter interpretation of that retribution theology.
How so?
The original history in Kings sometimes presents situations that don't neatly fit the immediate reward-punishment model. The classic example is King Manasseh.
Who the Book of Kings calls the most wicked king Judah ever had. Idolatry, sacrificing his own son. Just terrible stuff.
The absolute worst according to 2 Kings 21. Yet, he reigned for 55 years. A really long time. For the Deuteronomistic historian, maybe that was just a complex reality, but for the chronicler, that long reign for such a wicked king was a theological problem. It didn't fit the strict cause and effect model.
So how did the chronicler solve it?
He added something. If you look at the parallel account in 2 Chronicles 33, the chronicler inserts a story that's completely absent in Kings.
What happens in Chronicles?
The chronicler writes that God punished Manasseh by having the Assyrians capture him and take him away in chains. But then, in captivity, Manasseh supposedly humbled himself greatly, prayed, repented, and God heard him and restored him to his kingdom in Jerusalem.
So that explains the long reign. He sinned terribly, was punished immediately,
Right.
captivity, repented sincerely, and was rewarded immediately restoration.
Exactly. The chronicler edits the historical record, adding this repentance episode to make Manasseh's story fit perfectly within a system of immediate, proportional divine justice. It shows how theology can actively shape the writing or rewriting of history.
Okay, so beyond that main historical narrative shaped by retribution theology, there are other fascinating books that explore power, suffering, human initiative in different ways, like the Book of Esther.
Esther is unique. It's set entirely in the Persian diaspora. God is never explicitly mentioned, and it reads like a gripping political thriller.
He really does. The stakes are incredibly high from the start. Haman gets the king's permission to issue this decree.
An irrevocable decree under Persian law to annihilate all Jews, men, women, children, throughout the entire empire on a single specific day. It's total genocide planned.
And everything hinges on Esther,
Yeah.
the Jewish woman who happens to be queen but hasn't revealed her identity. And she's in this incredibly precarious position.
Terribly precarious. Approaching the king without being summoned could mean instant death. And the text notes she hadn't been called to see him in 30 days, which suggests her vigor might be waning.
And her cousin, Mordecai, delivers that incredibly powerful challenge to her.
It's one of the most famous lines about purpose and responsibility. He tells her not to think she'll escape just because she's in the palace. If she stays silent, help will come from elsewhere, but she and her family will be destroyed. And then he asks that piercing question.
Who knows? Perhaps you have come to royal dignity for just such a time as this.
It puts the choice squarely on her. It suggests her position isn't accidental. It might be providentially aligned for this exact crisis.
And Esther's response, it's just pure courage. She understands the risk completely.
She asks Mordecai to gather the Jews for a 3-day fast, and then she says, I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. It's this moment of absolute resolve, accepting the potential fatal consequence for the sake of her people, human agency taking center stage.
And her gamble pays off spectacularly, leading to that amazing reversal.
The irony is just delicious. Haman is consumed by his hatred for Mordecai, builds this huge gallows specifically to hang him,
But then the king can't sleep, has the Chronicles read, remembers Mordecai saved his life earlier.
and asks Haman, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Haman, thinking it must be him, suggests this lavish public procession.
And the king says, great, go do all that for Mordecai the Jew.
Haman is forced to lead his hated enemy through the city square, shouting, thus shall it be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor. It's the ultimate humiliation, orchestrated by his own arrogance and facilitated by Esther's courage. Political doom completely overturned by cunning and bravery.
It's such a dramatic contrast, then, to move to Nehemiah. Still about leadership, but much more practical, focused on, well, building things.
Yeah, Nehemiah is about civic action, community organizing, rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem after the exile. It's very grounded.
Chapter 3 is basically a list of who rebuilt which section of the wall. It's very logistical. But it wasn't easy, right? There was opposition.
Significant opposition. Local governors like Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite, Geshem the Arab, they relentlessly mocked and tried to intimidate the Jews to stop the work. Nehemiah had to organize armed guards alongside the builders.
But Nehemiah's leadership wasn't just about project management. The text highlights his integrity, too.
Absolutely. In Nehemiah chapter 5, there's this crisis where the poorer Jews are having to mortgage their fields, even sell their children into servitude just to survive and pay the Persian taxes. Nehemiah confronts the nobles and officials forcing these harsh loans.
And he leads by example, doesn't he?
He does. He points out that for his 12 years as governor, he never took the substantial food allowance and silver payment that previous governors had demanded from the people. He says explicitly he didn't do it because of the fear of God.
In a time of hardship, he refused to add to the burden. He put the community's well-being and his moral standing above his personal entitlement. That's a powerful leadership model.
It really is. It shows integrity as crucial for successful community restoration. But then we get to Job. And Job takes that whole system we saw in the historical books, the neat equation of sin and suffering, and just blows it apart.
Job is the big challenge, the outlier. It directly confronts the retribution theology.
Head on. Job is presented as righteous, blameless, yet he suffers unimaginable loss, children, wealth, health, and his friends who come to comfort him. They're basically spokesmen for the Deuteronomistic view.
They keep insisting he must have sinned.
Exactly. They're committed to the idea that suffering must be proportional to sin. You hear it from Bildad in chapter 8. Does God pervert justice, or does the Almighty pervert the right? Eliphaz, in chapter 15, insists the wicked always suffer. They need the universe to be orderly and predictable, even if it means blaming the victim.
But Job refuses that explanation. He knows he hasn't committed sins deserving this.
He completely rejects it, and he descends into this profound philosophical and existential crisis. He questions God's very attention. In chapter 7, he asks, "What are human beings that you make so much of them? Test them every moment. Why have you made me your target?" He feels singled out, unfairly persecuted.
And he realizes the sheer impossibility of arguing his case against God. The power imbalance is just too vast.
That's central to his despair in chapter 9. He looks at the cosmic scale of God's power moving mountains, shaking the earth, commanding the sun, sealing up the stars, and contrasts it with his own fragile mortality. How can a human possibly be just before God?
The whole idea of a fair trial seems absurd in that context.
It leads him to that heartbreaking conclusion in 9.33, realizing there's no one to mediate between him and God. There is no umpire between us who might lay his hand on us both. There's no arbiter, no equal footing. He's trapped in a situation where conventional justice seems irrelevant against overwhelming, incomprehensible power. The book forces you to sit with the terrifying possibility that suffering isn't always a neat calculation.
Wow. So pulling back after this deep dive, it really highlights the incredible complexity and, frankly, the internal tensions within this collection of texts.
Yeah, absolutely. We started right at the beginning, seeing how quickly the idea of moral failure gets introduced and escalates Cain's murder. Then Lamech's 77-fold vengeance boast. Conflict is there from the start.
And then we saw that strange duality in Exodus and Leviticus. The huge, grand divine acts like the Exodus itself, sitting right alongside this incredibly meticulous, almost obsessive detail about ritual purity, the tabernacle's gold and yarn, the rules for houses with mold, the handling of bodily fluids.
That juxtaposition of the epic and the microscopic. Then understanding the historical books, Joshua through Kings, not as neutral history, but as the Deuteronomistic history, a specific theological argument about retribution, about obedience and consequence.
A lesson hammered home so strongly that the later chronicler felt the need to actually rewrite parts of the history, like with Manasseh, to make sure it fit the theological model perfectly. That editorial intervention is fascinating.
It really shows the text evolving to reinforce a message. And finally, we looked at these other voices, Esther showing incredible human agency and political maneuvering in a context where God isn't even mentioned. Nehemiah modeling integrity and civic leadership.
In Job, the profound, unsettling challenge to the whole retribution system, forcing readers to confront the mystery of suffering and the sheer scale of divine power that seems beyond human comprehension.
The fact that this library contains all of this, the explicit hardening of a heart, the bizarre bird rituals for house cleansing, the philosophical despair of Job alongside the triumphant reversals in Esther, that's why it remains such a powerful and honestly endlessly debatable cultural force.
These aren't simple stories with easy morals. They grapple with the hardest questions about justice, power, suffering, and what it means to live under a divine authority that can seem both intimately involved and terrifyingly remote.
And perhaps the most potent expression of that ultimate, all-encompassing power comes near the end of the Torah, in the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. It feels like it could almost be an answer to both the Deuteronomistic historian and to Job.
What does it say?
Moses speaks for God, declaring, "See now that I, even I am he, there is no God besides me. I kill and I make alive, I wound and I heal, and no one can deliver from my hand."
Wow. I kill and I make alive, I wound and I heal. That covers everything, doesn't it? Both the judgment and the restoration, the suffering and the solace, all attributed to the same single sovereign source.
It's a final, stark assertion of absolute power, encompassing all outcomes, defying easy categorization, something profound to reflect on.
Definitely provocative thought to end on. That unilateral power and how we make sense of it in light of everything else we've explored. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We hope you'll keep digging into these texts that continue to resonate and challenge us today.
Subscribe to the Timeless Tales podcast. Your stories, your time.